So welcome to our session on adaptive climbing. Today we have Michelle and Trisine talking to us. So Michelle is the president of the Climbing Access Project. She herself is a paraclimbing athlete with multiple national championship medals and numerous other competition accolades. Her goal with the Climbing Access Project is to grow access to climbing for individuals with disabilities in the DFW area and beyond through monthly meetups and through cooperation with local gym leadership to include paraclimbing into their local competitions. Outside of climbing, she's also a high school math teacher in Plano, Texas, and a children's ministry director at her church. Trisine is a certified prosthetist and orthotist in Little Rock, Arkansas. She earned her bachelor's in business from UT Austin and her master's of prosthetics and orthotics from UT Southwestern here in Dallas. She co-founded Go Beyond Climbing in 2019, an adaptive climbing group that hosts monthly meetups at a local climbing gym in Plano to provide individuals with disabilities the opportunity to experience rock climbing. She's now one of the directors of the Climbing Access Project, and she plans on using her experiences in the field of orthotics and prosthetics and adaptive rock climbing to help others stay mobile, healthy, and physically independent. So please join me in welcoming Michelle and Trisine today.
Thank you for the intro. Hi, everyone. Yeah, we're really excited to be attending this UT Southwestern Adaptive Sports Coalition Education Series. And today, Michelle and I will be talking about adaptive climbing. So one of my favorite quotes that has really shaped the way I think about adaptive climbing and, as an able-bodied person, especially, it's really just, it turns the traditional instructor student kind of relationship upside down, because really the climbers who is kind of coaching the instructor on what works and what doesn't for their type of climbing. And climbers are usually very in tune with their bodies, so allowing them to help tailor techniques and technical solutions to their own limitations. So this is kind of like the baseline and how I kind of have viewed adaptive climbing throughout the last couple of years. And then Michelle, if you want to talk about the outline.
Yeah, so there's a little outline of what we'll talk about today. So we're going to introduce elCAP Adaptive, or the Climbing Access Project, and then we're going to talk through some of the benefits of climbing, some safety aspects, volunteer belay tips, and then just some of my experiences as an adaptive athlete and a paraclimber, and then wrap up with just some resources and further things to look into. So starting off with just introducing elCAP, or the Climbing Access Project. So we officially founded in this year, in August of this year. However, previously we were operating as Go Beyond Climbing. So I am the president, and then we have our directors, Trisine, who's with us, and then Darcy Wallace. Our mission is to facilitate accessibility for adaptive climbers through rock climbing education, member advocacy, and community growth on behalf of our members. And so our vision is to facilitate the participation in the adaptive sport of rock climbing, education, healthy living, and just creating an inclusive community for all members. Part of the way we do this is we host adaptive climbing meetups every third Friday of the month at Movement Plano from 7 to 9 p.m. We're working on growing these and getting more athletes to come, and also just expanding competition, especially locally in the DFW area, but also in the United States and beyond. So we've just got a few photos that we're going to look through, just seeing some of our meetups from the past. So some of the athletes here are from BIND, the Brain Injury Network of Dallas. So this is from one of our adaptive climbing meetups a few years ago. We've got just some more of our participants and our members. Some of these athletes come consistently to these meetups. Some show up every once in a while. Some show up just to try it. Yeah. So here's one of our athletes in particular. His name's Adam. He was born with his umbilical cord wrapped around his neck. When he first started climbing, we struggled to get him to feel relaxed. He had some abnormal upper extremity flexion and posture in the resting position. But over a couple of months of showing up and continuing to work hard and try, he finally was able to make it to the top of the wall. And it's something that he looks forward to doing every week. So his sister says he's a lot more interested in being active since being introduced to climbing. He was going to our monthly adaptive climbing meetups. And so he's an athlete who feels more safe and comfortable with a consistent guide on the wall. So some of our athletes, they are more independent. They want to be able to climb all on their own. Others are more comfortable having someone climb side by side with them. Whatever works best for the athlete is what we provide. And we've been able to see the progress and improvements that he's made has translated into his everyday life and his home skills as well. So the things that adaptive athletes learn through climbing aren't just applicable to sports or climbing specifically, but those skills can transfer to day-to-day life as well. Cool.
Yeah, and thank you, Michelle. So some of the benefits of climbing and other safety topics. So with benefits of climbing, a big emphasis that a lot of people come to these meetups is the emphasis of community, and then the support, the camaraderie, and the friendship. That's just a large part of why athletes and volunteers return. And the physical benefits of climbing include muscle strengthening. You have improving bone density, things that we might not immediately think of, such as enhancing dexterity and fine motor control. And then the other cognitive benefits can be attained when problem solving, also solving like different, techniques on how to complete the route, and then strengthening as well, or strategizing efficient and tactful ways to complete the route. And then some even argue that there's a spiritual aspect to climbing. It's you versus the wall. And then especially when you're, going outdoors, there's that kind of more intimate connection with nature and just being outside. And then for safety, so I always say that inside the climbing gym, you have a controlled environment. And then it's a great way to build the adaptive climbing community. There's not loose rock kind of falling, but and the gyms typically have equipment that's regulated as well as checked on a regular basis. And then most are located nearby hospitals in case of emergencies. And then there's also, with our adaptive climbing meetups, to further enhance the safety, there's a need for regular volunteers to kind of come consistently, those who have experience. We usually pair new volunteers with experienced ones who have had an experience working with adaptive athletes and know how to belay. And then for those of you who are new to climbing, a belayer is usually paired with the climber, and they have they're on one end of the rope, and they create tension through using a belay device that usually called a gree or an ATC, just fancy words for a belay device. And then what that does is it cinches the rope, and whenever there's tension on the climber end of the rope, then that rope feeds through, and it kind of acts as an assisted brake. But yeah, so lastly, we try to stock our toolbox with a variety of different adaptive equipment that can benefit athletes with varying disabilities to enhance safety and improve performance, such as full body harnesses, laser pointers, ascenders, noise reducing headphones, and then something like elbows and knee pads that we adapted from volleyball equipment. So it's all sorts of different adaptive gear that's essential. Yeah.
All right, so one hugely beneficial adaptive climbing equipment that we've been using at the last two adaptive sports expos is the Wellman Arc 4-to-1 sit climbing system. So this is a climbing apparatus that allows athletes with various impairments to climb with just their upper body. So it essentially functions as a pulley system that reduces the amount of force that the climber has to apply by essentially doing pull-ups to get up the wall. And so as a 4-to-1 system, it requires a fourth of the strength to lift your weight doing that pull up but it also takes like 4 times as many pulls to do that. And so that's kind of how that works. I'm gonna play a short snippet of this video talking that just goes through like what the Wellman arc harness is and what it looks like to set up. So you can see a bit of that, maybe.
Yeah, I would full screen it and then, yeah. Can you zoom in a little bit, Michelle, or full
Yeah,
screen?
there we go.
It's lagging on my end, but yeah, essentially there's just a lot of different pieces of the equipment, like the ascender and the pulley system. It was very intimidating when I first learned how to set it up, but I think that's good, Michelle.
Cool. All right. Get out. There we are. Yeah, so the Wellman arc climbing system is helpful for conditions such as paralysis. So if we have an athlete with quadriplegia or tetraplegia, especially when they have all 4 limbs affected, or including their trunk, or even just paraplegia with minimal function or no function in their legs, this is an option to get them to simulate climbing without having to use their lower extremities to help propel them up the wall. But there are also athletes who are paraplegic who simply climb the actual wall using only their upper extremities. And so it's just whatever the athlete is more comfortable with and what they want to try. No. Slide, please. Maybe. There we are. Sorry. What slide are we on? Okay. I'm not sure where this is in our notes. Oh, these are all the hidden slides. There we go. You're muted, I think.
Yeah, do you mind going back a couple slides? I do want
Yeah,
to just
sorry.
kind of show.
Okay, yep.
So some of the pictures from our previous UT Southwestern Adaptive Sports Expo, where the UTA climbing wall and campus rec at UTA, they allowed us kind of access to their climbing wall. And it was awesome because we set up the Wellman Arc there within the climbing gym at the Mavericks Activity Center. So these are just some pictures from previous years. And then this most recent, you can go to the next slide, Michelle. Yeah, the most recent one, this past year, we had actually the next slide as well, some more pictures, but yeah. So those are awesome, and we love going every year to the UT Southwestern Adaptive Sports Expo, and it's just, yeah, something we look forward to every year. And now I want to talk about just different kind of levels of amputation as it applies to paraclimbers. So some athletes, they could have lost a limb due to birth defect or a traumatic injury or disease. But then when they have maybe gotten involved in climbing, some adaptive climbers may choose not to use a prosthesis, and others may choose to use a prosthesis. So for instance, above knee amputees, they may climb without a prosthesis or intentionally get one that's adapted to climbing that's a lot shorter, like the top left photo you see there, because it allows their center of mass to be a lot closer to the wall, but it also gives them a better grip onto the holds. And then how I like to think of it too is it if you have a whole prosthesis kind of dangling, it kind of creates this pendulum effect, so it makes it a lot heavier. So overall, reducing the weight is very beneficial for climbers. And then one method I've seen too are some lower limb amputees. They'll turn their prosthetic foot, so usually it's an adaptive climbing foot, and they'll turn it like 180 degrees so that they can really kind of it'll be mounted on backwards, and then that'll allow them to use their heel on, like very close to the wall, and then it'll kind of reduce the typical spring that you get maybe a prosthetic foot offers. We do want to remind them that they won't walk very well if they're trying to walk in that fashion. So and then yeah, there's a climbing foot. So that's one of the climbing companies, Evolve. They make shoes, but they've also got an adaptive climbing foot, the EAF. So that's really cool. As a prosthetist, I work with a lot of patients, and sometimes insurance will cover, a secondary prosthesis, maybe used for recreational or even like a shower leg. But I haven't been able to find an opportunity to get someone a climbing foot. I'm still looking forward to that though. And then another thing with other tips that we want to remind amputee climbers is just to pay attention to their skin when they're making contact with the prosthetic socket. Make sure that there's no excessive redness or blister forming. And then we just want to remind them that a secondary suspension method is really important. I've had a friend who was climbing. He's a below knee amputee. So he lost his leg at the below the knee, and he didn't quite have suction, which is a form of suspension. He lost suction, and then his leg actually came flying, not flying, but it fell, and it was really scary. And that's why we, having a secondary suspension mechanism, such as like we have one that's called a TES belt, that could be very beneficial, and then it'll provide kind of a backup suspension. So, okay, I'll pass it on to Michelle.
All right. So we're going to talk a little bit about volunteer training and techniques and tips. We don't have a ton of time left, so we'll go through this a little bit quickly. So first thing is like to put the person first. So positive language empowers and can set the tone for a safe and accepting environment. So when writing or speaking about people with disabilities, it's important to put the person first. People with disabilities have names, use them, and get to know someone before you start asking deeper about their disability. They're more than just their disability. Like instead of asking, oh, how did you lose your leg? Or why are you in a wheelchair? Like ask, what do you do for fun? How long have you been climbing? Get to know them as a person first, just like you would any other person that you met at the gym or out and about. Always just ask questions when you are wanting to help someone. So the person with the disability is the expert in their disability. Like they know themselves best of anyone. So instead of directly telling them, oh, this is how you should do this, ask what is the best way to help. Some athletes want more help than others. But just listen to what they have. If they ask for suggestions, provide them. But otherwise, just listen to them. Don't ignore the person with the disability. Speak directly to them. Even if they're nonverbal or have communication impairment, speak to them, not their caretaker. Uh, and then just be yourself. We want to be as courteous as possible, but sometimes we might be a little bit nervous. That's okay. Disability is a spectrum. People's abilities can vary significantly, so people may require varying levels of assistance. Um, just be mindful of when they tell you like something is uncomfortable, something may be painful, and work to find solutions to that for them. And also, if they're willing to be uncomfortable for a little bit and push through some of that, that's also okay. It is up to them, it is their body. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some specific techniques in the gym with coaching. So I'll pass that back off to Trisine.
Thank you, Michelle. So some of the methods to belaying adaptive climbers, we have these techniques such as like using the modularity climbing wall as a tool, virtual holds, side climbing, active assists, directional anchors, and I'll get into that in the next slides. So virtual holds, essentially what that really means is kind of you creating a hold that doesn't exist, maybe with your hand or your thigh. Like as a belayer, you can help maybe put their foot on to your thigh, and kind of what Javi is doing here. He's using one volunteer, he's using his palm to kind of create a hold, and then that just helps just fill in the blanks, and it helps as they're climbing up the wall. And then the next slide shows side climbing, and Michelle touched up on this previously, and just really having someone, usually this involves 4 people. So the belayer would be belaying the climber, the adaptive climber, and then another pair, so another pair of volunteers, one belayer belaying and one of the other volunteers to kind of climb side by side, and then that just assists them and maybe creating virtual holds as they climb. And then active assist is I'm here kind of weighting the rope, and that's allowing me to kind of create a counterweight for the climber. So let's say maybe they're fatigued or they just need a boost. So I can maybe on the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, and then I'll put most of my weight and weight the rope to actually help give them a boost. And then you just got to time it well usually. And then more picks, and then I'll have Michelle talk about competition climbing.
Yeah, so we got a few more minutes, so we'll kind of start wrapping up by talking about competition climbing. So elCAP Adaptive, we seek to support athletes who are interested in competing in paraclimbing at the local, national, and international level. So a big focus this past year is we've been working closely with gyms in the DFW area to ensure that adaptive athletes are included in all competitions. So historically, like paraclimbing nationals was the only competition available specifically for paraclimbers. And that can be pretty scary as people are signing up for their first ever competition. It's got that big title of national championship. And so that's kind of a barrier for a lot of people who want to get into competing as a paraclimber. So I've been working with whenever gyms host local competitions to just say, hey, can you add a category for paraclimbers? So they can feel like they are competing against people in a similar position as they are, but giving them an opportunity to try out competition so that nationals every year isn't quite such a scary thing. So just here's some of my photos from this. These are all from this past year, from my competition season. So there's about several different categories in paraclimbing with an effort to help climbers compete against people with similar levels of disability. So I have a neurological impairment similar to MS. So I compete in what they call the RP3. So the R and P stand for range and power. And 3 is for the least impaired of the categories. And so I've competed at 2 paraclimbing nationals, And so I'm getting prepped for my third one coming up this March. And so being a part of the climbing community has been just an amazing part of helping me accept who I am with my disability. Because I mean, growing up, I was an able-bodied athlete playing varsity sports, and then in college, had some of these neurological impairments start to kick in, and was struggling to find my place in the athletic community as someone with a disability. And so this climbing community has given me some of my best friends and has allowed me to travel the country a lot. So if we want to see, this is a list of all of the competitions and festivals and such that I've been to this year. These are all paraclimbing specific things. The four competitions with the asterisks marked on them are ones that we specifically, with elCAP, worked with the gyms in the area to have them include a paraclimbing category. And then the others from around the country are just a lot of other opportunities that I've been able to participate in. So there's a very quickly growing uh, paraclimbing community with a lot of opportunities for competition, and from like very small local competitions with maybe 2 to 3 athletes to nationals, which last year had about 130 athletes, which was our biggest year yet. Uh, and then just some of our goals for elCAP Adaptive in 2025, as I've been working to grow this program, is to increase attendance at monthly meetups, as we've been rebuilding to fundraise to support athletes at competitions. Just for context, the membership and competition fees for nationals each year are $300 on their own. And then add to that travel and lodging, and that's all for a single competition. And so for athletes who want to be competitive on the national and international circuit, being able to help support them financially is really helpful. And then also just working to develop some specific paraclimbing training programs for local athletes, and maybe even putting on a competition training camp that out of state athletes can come attend. Continue working with local competitions to add some paraclimbing categories. And then a bigger goal is to coordinate and run a local paraclimbing specific competition. So instead of just adding a little category into the competitions already existing, just creating a competition here that is just for paraclimbers. There have been a couple around the country this year. There was one in Boston and one in Atlanta, and soon to be one in Houston, and just creating more of those opportunities where we can have dozens of athletes come and show up and compete, when instead of just going to one competition nationals every single year. So yeah. Where need to wrap it up there for questions, or do we have a little bit more time, Elizabeth?
You have 3 more minutes.
3 more minutes. Okay. So in March 2019, the IFSC, so that's the International Federation of Sport Climbing General Assembly, approved a paraclimbing development plan with the following goals. Some of these goals have been met. Like the third goal was to professionalize the sport by trying to meet the standards of the International Paralympic Committee. This was successful. This past summer, it was announced that paraclimbing will be included in the LA 2028 Paralympics, which will be the first time ever that climbing has been in the Paralympics. It's still a bit of a mystery as to which categories are going to be included. So to talk a little bit about the various categories that exist in international paraclimbing competition. So those lettered ones, A through I, those are the qualifying impairments, and they are split up into 5 different types of categories. So there's the neurological and physical disability, which is where I fit in. The lower the number, the more impaired. So in RP1 category, you'll see a lot of athletes with like cerebral palsy. RP2 you'll see a lot of athletes with spina bifida and various disabilities. RP3, you'll see a wide variety of things, MS, spinal fusions, spinal cord injuries, but there's always a lot of flexibility on where people land depending on the level of their disability. There are categories for visual impairment. So visually impaired climbers, they climb blindfolded if you're in the B1 category, and they have what's called a collar. So they basically have a headset on, and they have someone on the ground who has vision and is telling them where the holds are as they're going. And then we have 2 categories of upper extremity amputees. So one is for just hand impairment, so missing fingers, and then the other is for missing arm, but still including an elbow joint. And then we have one category for lower extremity amputees, and then one for seated or double leg amputees. And then at national competitions, we have youth categories as well. So the classification is a little bit messy sometimes, as it's hard, especially in that RP category, because there's a lot of nuance in where some of these disabilities can lie. But that's kind of a example of the different types of athletes that you'll see on the paraclimbing circuit. And it'll be interesting to see which of these categories will be in the Paralympics in 4 years. So that's 4 great years of growth that we get to look forward to. So kind of wrap it up there.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that really interesting talk, Michelle and Trisine. I'm going to open up the floor for questions now. You can just unmute yourself and ask them the questions. I guess I'll just start off. For the youth categories, do they also get sorted out by like neurological, visual, or are they all in the same category?
So for youth at nationals, they lump them all into one category, partly as a numbers thing of there aren't a lot of youth paraclimbing competitors at the moment. And because in order to compete on the international circuit, which is where the classifications really matter, you have to be 17 or older. And so youth is up through age 16, but 17, 18, and older are all classified and they compete in the adult categories. Yeah.
Gotcha. Cool.
Hi, Michelle and Trisine. Thanks so much for a great talk. This is Shane Miller. I'm a pediatric sports medicine doc, and think this is awesome. I appreciate you sharing with us. We have an interest in both adaptive sports, but also in rock climbing from a research standpoint. And so I was curious to whether you're familiar with any research that's been done in this area, or if there's a need, whether you would be willing to maybe help connect us with some of your athletes, so we could, do some surveys and study and see how we can contribute to not only increasing engagement, but perhaps making it even safer and figuring out what types of injury patterns may be encountered in an adaptive climbing compared to other climbing athletes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely an area that there is a lot of need. I know athletes who already have disabilities are obviously at a higher risk of further injury due to the way that we have to adapt our climbing. Like, for example, because I have higher impairment in my right side than my left, I often overcompensate by using my left side more, which can lead to overuse injuries there. There has been some interesting research in the benefits of climbing for athletes with disabilities, specifically some for individuals with Parkinson's, and how climbing can help work on some of those issues with tremors and such like that, and also specifically for people with ataxia. Climbing is an excellent way to work on building those coordination skills because of having 4 points of contact. Because athletes and individuals with ataxia, the more points of contact on surfaces, then it helps create just those connections in the brain of being able to orient and coordinate better. So there has been some research on those benefits, but there, as far as I'm aware, hasn't been a lot of research on the injury specific part and what athletes are more susceptible to. But that would be something I'd be super interested in working with and helping out with. So if you want to reach out, I'm going to put our contact page up while we answer these questions. There we go. So you can send us an email and then we can absolutely talk more about that.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and to add on to that, in the past, we've had flyers put out of our adaptive climbing meetups at Texas Scottish Rite, as I believe it was Scottish Rite, as well as Children's Hospital, so that a lot of the PM&R doctors and people working there can actually refer their patients to go to our meetup. So if you do want to send us an email, like Michelle said, and maybe just kind of add a description on what you're looking for and what kind of research you're looking for, we can always send that out to our newsletter and see if there's anyone interested in participating in kind of a research study or like a, maybe a long term or whatever that is. But yeah, we haven't specifically worked with an adaptive climbing research, but I think it'd be really interesting to start that.
Wonderful. Thank you both for your responses, and here's to hoping that there's an RP3 division and we can see Michelle in LA in 28.
We're hoping.
Would you all be willing to speak to, like, if I'm in an area where there's not a robust adaptive climbing scene, but there are a few universities and one or two, private clubs, and so I'm wondering who I could approach and how, and if they're interested, what would I need to do to make sure that they have everything that we would need? Do you have any advice for that?
I mean, as far as getting started with creating adaptive climbing, even meetups in the area, it's just talking to the director of the gym, which was basically what we had to do. You don't need a whole lot aside from the willingness to be there and create that space for them. And so talking to the director of gym saying, hey, can we have this sort of meetup once a month or whatever it may be? And even starting small. Like right now, some of our meetups have 2 athletes, and that's including me, and I'm the one running the meetup. And that's okay because it takes some time to grow that and create that space, but just continuing to show up and do that helps that grow. And then you can reach out to the climbing clubs at those universities and such, and see just if they have students who want to show up and volunteer, and getting volunteers involved then will also help get more athletes involved, etc. So yeah.
Where are you located, Matthew?
I'm in New Orleans.
Oh, awesome.
Yes.
And actually, if you don't mind, Michelle, going back to the previous slide, there's an awesome manual. This is a good place to start. It's called the Paradox Sports has an adaptive climbing manual to help instructors and climbers kind of build out a adaptive climbing program. So it talks about systems, equipment, and a variety of different things to help integrate adaptive climbing into schools as well as the local gyms and communities. So if you want to, I think you can find it online, but Paradox Sports is based out of Colorado.
Yeah, and they're one of the biggest adaptive climbing organizations in the country, perhaps the biggest.
Got it. Thanks. That's awesome. Thank you both.
All right, if there are no more questions, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Michelle and Trisine, for your talk again. Hope everyone has a good night.
Thank you
Thank you
all.
guys.
Have a good night.